Alright, so you've made it to the final tutorial video of the course. Congratulations, and I truly hope you've learned a bit more about motion design along the way. I've already posted a bonus video about exporting your motion design from Studio, so if you want to check that out and keep up to date with any other bonus videos I post, make sure to subscribe on meaningfulmotionui.com if you haven't already. For this final tutorial video, we'll be talking about emotional motion. As I mentioned at the beginning of the course, this is an area of motion design that I think most people understand pretty intuitively. A lot of us grew up watching cartoons and Disney movies, and those rely heavily on using motion to evoke emotion. A lot of that translates pretty well into product and web design. Before we jump into some of the animations, I just want to point out that there are two different ways that digital products can use emotional motion. The first is to emphasize a certain emotion in the user. A great example of that would be celebrating a success state that only happens once or twice when using your app. The second method is to use motion to reinforce your brand. We looked at a couple examples of this at the beginning of the course, but basically your brand can have an ongoing tone, theme, or message that exists more globally than specific success or failure points along the way. MailChimp has a great example of this in their content style guide. It's more targeted toward content and writing, but it's easy to see how it can be applied to motion as well. Let's take a look. So as we go into their style guide, you can see that voice is the first category that they talk about. They describe the MailChimp voice as familiar, friendly, and straightforward. Before even going any further, I think we can already see how those specific attributes can translate over to motion. They go a bit further though, describing it as fun but not silly, confident but not cocky, smart but not stodgy. Each of these can translate into faster or slower motion or using different properties in different ways. If we jump over to their voice and tone guidelines, we can look at how they manage success messages versus error messages. With the success messages, people are already feeling relief, pride, joy, anticipation. It's an opportunity to be funny, and they say to use casual language. So this is an area where users are already feeling pretty good, so it's a good opportunity to increase that either through the text or through motion. If we jump over to the failure message section, someone might be experiencing confusion, stress, or anger. So in this case, it's more important to offer a solution or a next step rather than make a joke. So they still have the overarching goal of being familiar, friendly, and straightforward. But if there's a failure alert, it's going to be handled a little differently than a success one. So here I have an example of two different notifications. The one in red will be the error message, and the one in green is the success state. If we jump into the timeline and preview them, we can see they both have the same motion right now. We want to leave the timing the same, but we'll adjust the easing curves to give these a bit different personality. I'll select our success animation, and let's play with some of the different options. I'll select pop. It looks a little faster, but it doesn't look too different other than that, so let's slow it down. When we slow it down, you can see that it overshoots the position just a little bit and then falls back into place. If we go back in and turn this into a custom animation, we can exaggerate that even more. So it moves in quickly and then kind of slingshots back into place. We'll move over to bounce to see what that looks like. And again, it's pretty fast for this particular transition, so let's slow it down. When we slow it down, we can see it's almost like a marble or something like that hitting the ground. It bounces, but it stops pretty quickly. And then finally, if we go to elastic, it's almost like a slingshot. So that one feels like it has a lot of personality. That's a pretty good option. We'll go to ease out. That's the option that we used in the last video for when something starts off the screen, but then animates in. And that still looks like it's happening pretty slowly compared to the success animation. So let's go back to the first artboard. And we'll make it more of a mask rather than a movement. Finally, we can bump that curve up just a bit. But we want to make sure that it's not overshooting. And now it's just a really clean, really efficient masking transition. We'll move back over to the card animation from the last video. And then let's preview some of the changes that I've made. I've used both the timing and the easing to give this a bit more personality. Everything still comes in pretty swiftly, but it's staggered just a bit. And then when it leaves, it looks like it almost falls away. So we'll preview the first stage. And it's basically just an ease out transition on everything, but they're staggered so the cards enter in order. I'll move over to the exit transition. We'll preview that. And you can see they're staggered in a slightly different way to give a bit of that falling feeling. But really what makes this one interesting is the easing curve. So when I pull this open, you can see it's basically the opposite of a pop curve. So it'll actually move backwards first and then it'll move forwards. Something like this is really useful for objects that are starting at rest. And then something like pop is useful for something that's coming in from off the screen and then coming to rest. I've got one more example we'll look at. So this is an example of using the same timing but different personalities. So on the top we've got elegant, in the middle we've got professional, and then at the bottom we've got playful. With elegant, we're using more subtle motion, but then we're also using opacity. For professional, the element isn't actually moving, it's just growing from the top down. It doesn't have any sort of scaling though, it's just growing on the y-axis. And then finally for playful, we're using scale a bit. So it starts really small, gets bigger, and then overshoots it a bit. So let's slow these down so you can get a better sense for what's happening. Elegant, we've got subtle motion and opacity. Professional, it's growing on the y-axis. And then playful, we're using both scale and the easing curves. Even without changing the timing on any of these, we're getting really different personalities just through modifying different properties and using slightly different techniques. This can be paired with typography or color or a lot of traditional design techniques and can create a really memorable, powerful brand.